There's a country where people earn less than Americans, work fewer hours, and almost never touch the stock market. And yet they quietly build more lasting wealth than almost anyone in the Western world. No flashy cars, no crypto gambles, no hustle culture. And the strangest part is that none of it looks impressive from the outside. Just 12 strange little habits that most Americans have never even heard of. Today, I'm going to hand you every single one of them. My name is Marcos, and I've spent the last decade obsessed with one question. Why do some people feel rich on modest incomes, while others feel broke earning six figures? The answer kept leading me back to one place, and that place is Germany. Not because Germans are richer on paper, but because of how they think about money. It's almost the exact opposite of everything you've been taught. I'm not German, I just got tired of watching hardworking people stay broke while doing everything they were told. If you want the real mechanics of quiet, durable wealth and not get-rich-quick noise, continue watching, because this list is going to rewire how you see every dollar you spend. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The average American household carries thousands of dollars in credit card debt, a financed car sitting in the driveway, and almost nothing in real savings. We've been taught that looking wealthy and being wealthy are the same thing. They are not. In Germany, the wealthiest person on the street is often the one driving a 15-year-old hatchback. Their money is completely invisible, and that's exactly the point. You would walk right past them on the sidewalk and never guess what they're worth. Germans don't perform wealth. They accumulate it, slowly, deliberately, almost stubbornly. It's the difference between a paycheck that controls you and a paycheck you quietly command. And the reason comes down to a set of cultural habits so deeply wired that most Germans don't even realize they're doing them. But here's the part that most people completely miss, and it might be the most important point in this entire video. None of these habits require a high income. They only require a different relationship with money. Let me walk you through all 12. Habit number 1 starts with language itself. In German, the word for debt is Schulden. The word for guilt is Schuld. They are almost the same word. Think about what that does to a culture over hundreds of years. When you borrow money, you don't feel clever or empowered. You feel like you owe something, like you've done something slightly wrong. Most Americans treat debt as a clever tool. Germans treat it as a heavy weight, so they avoid it on instinct. Picture two neighbors. Jake finances a brand new car at $600 a month and feels successful every time he drives it. Lucas, over in Munich, drives a paid-off used car and feels something Jake never will, completely free. 10 years later, Jake has paid for 3 cars he never truly owned, while Lucas invested that same $600 every month and built a small fortune. That feeling, that quiet freedom, is something no finance luxury can ever buy. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that will probably surprise you. Habit number 2 breaks one of America's most sacred rules. Germany has one of the lowest home ownership rates in the entire developed world, with barely half the population owning the place they live in. Americans hear that and assume Germans must be poorer. The opposite is true. Germans rent on purpose, often for their entire lives, and they invest the difference. They aren't trapped by a 30-year mortgage, endless property taxes, and a roof that always seems to need fixing. Run the actual numbers and it gets brutal. A typical buyer can sink tens of thousands of dollars a year into interest, taxes, insurance, and repairs that build them almost nothing. A disciplined German renter takes that same gap and quietly feeds it into investments that compound in the background. Lucas isn't poorer than his American counterpart. He's just liquid while they're locked in. And while half of America stretches to buy a house they can't really afford, millions of Germans grow richer by simply refusing to. Habit number 3 feels almost ancient in a tap-to-pay world. Germans love cash. Walk into a bakery in Berlin and try to pay with a card, and you might actually get a polite no. There's a real reason for this that goes beyond tradition. When you hand over physical bills, your brain genuinely registers the loss. You feel the money leave your hand. I once watched a man in Hamburg count out exact change for his groceries, coin by coin, completely unbothered by the line behind him. To him, that slow physical ritual wasn't an inconvenience, it was control. Swiping a card or tapping a phone removes that little sting completely, which is exactly why we all overspend with them. Here's something that might blow your mind. Studies on spending behavior show people will pay significantly more for the very same item when they use a card instead of cash. The card makes spending feel like nothing, and nothing is exactly what your savings become. Germans simply never gave up that built-in brake. They kept the small friction that quietly keeps them rich. Habit number 4 is a proverb that every German child grows up hearing, Wer billig kauft, kauft zweimal. Whoever buys cheap, buys twice. It's a tiny phrase, but it quietly reshapes how an entire nation shops. A German would rather buy one pair of well-made shoes that last 10 years than 5 cheap pairs that fall apart by spring. This sounds like spending more, but over time it's the exact opposite. Buying real quality once is dramatically cheaper than replacing disposable junk over and over again. Think about the American closet stuffed with clothes that fell apart in a season versus the German wardrobe with fewer pieces that quietly last a decade. It also kills impulse buying because every purchase becomes a long-term decision instead of a quick hit of dopamine. But here's where most people mess this up, and I see it constantly. Habit number 5 would make most influencers deeply uncomfortable. In Germany, being frugal isn't embarrassing, it's genuinely respected. They even have a national symbol for it, the Swabian housewife who runs the household budget with iron discipline. Where American culture celebrates spending and treating yourself, German culture celebrates saving and self-control. Frugality there isn't seen as deprivation, it's seen as competence, as intelligence, as a quiet form of self-respect. Imagine living somewhere your friends are impressed that you packed your lunch, not that you bought a new watch. And when the people around you admire saving instead of spending, doing the right thing with your money stops feeling like a painful sacrifice. It starts to feel like winning. Your environment ends up doing the hard work that willpower alone never could. That brings us straight to habit number 6. Germans keep what they call a Notgroschen, which literally means an emergency penny. It's a dedicated cushion of cash, completely separate from everything else, that they refuse to touch unless real disaster strikes. This is not the same as their savings or their investments. It's pure insurance against the chaos of life, and here's why it quietly matters more than any investment return you could chase. The number one reason ordinary people fall into debt isn't bad budgeting, it's the unexpected. The broken transmission, the sudden medical bill, the job that disappears overnight. A Notgroschen means that life's emergencies never get the chance to turn into financial catastrophes. Let me give you a number that will put this in perspective. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans say they couldn't cover a surprise $1,000 bill without going into debt. A German with a full Notgroschen simply doesn't live with that fear, and that calm is its own quiet kind of wealth. Which brings me to habit number 7, the beating heart of this entire video. According to decades of wealth research, the typical millionaire is far more likely to drive a modest, practical car than a flashy luxury one. In one famous study of American millionaires, the most common car they drove wasn't a Ferrari or a Tesla, it was a Toyota. In Germany, this isn't a study, it's simply a way of life. The country that builds Porsches and Mercedes for the world is full of genuinely wealthy people who choose to drive neither. Real wealth is quiet. It almost never announces itself. The flashy car, the designer logo, the constant upgrades, those are usually the signs of money leaving, not money staying. Germans understand deep in their bones that every dollar spent looking rich is a dollar that can never actually make you rich. The German millionaire would rather his bank account be loud and his lifestyle be silent. They would simply rather be wealthy than look wealthy. And that single choice, repeated for decades, is the entire difference between the two. Habit number 8 is patience turned into an actual system. Germans love a financial product called the Bosparvertrag, a long-term savings contract where you commit to setting aside a fixed amount every single month for years before you ever buy a home. It sounds slow. It is slow. And that is exactly the genius hidden inside it. It forces discipline, it removes temptation, and it makes saving automatic and beautifully boring. Boring is the most underrated word in all of finance. Saving just $300 a month sounds almost pointless at first, but left untouched for 30 years at a reasonable return, that boring little habit can quietly grow past $300,000. The most reliable path to wealth has never once been exciting. It's the same small action repeated thousands of times. Germans build entire financial products around that truth, while the rest of us keep chasing the next thrilling shortcut. Slow money is the only money that reliably stays. Habit number 9 is about fear, but fear used intelligently. Germans are famous for insuring almost everything, but they actually do it with real strategy. They insure heavily against true catastrophe, the liability claim, the long-term disability, the events that could wipe out an entire life. But they take high deductibles on the small stuff, because insuring tiny risks is just expensive peace of mind that nobody actually needs. A German might happily pay the first $1,000 of any car repair himself, while making absolutely sure that one lawsuit or one serious illness can never bankrupt him. The lesson here is simple but genuinely powerful. Protect yourself completely from the disasters that can ruin you, and stop wasting money guarding against the small inconveniences you can easily absorb. Most people do the exact reverse, and they quietly bleed money for it every single month. It's a way of buying real safety instead of expensive worry. Habit number 10 is a tradition that is almost 100 years old. Many German households still keep a Haushaltsbuch, a household book where they write down every single expense by hand. In the age of automatic apps, this sounds completely absurd. But the simple act of physically recording where your money goes does something that no automatic tracker ever can. It makes you conscious. You cannot lie to a notebook. When you have to write down that fourth coffee or that impulse purchase you already regret, you slowly start spending differently, all on your own. By the end of a single month, that little book reveals the one uncomfortable truth most people spend their whole lives avoiding: exactly where their money actually went. Pure awareness, with no budget and no rules attached, is often enough to change behavior. But here's the part that nobody in finance will ever tell you. Habit number 11 secretly explains the entire German economy. It's a concept called the Mittelstand, the thousands of small and medium family businesses that think in decades, not in quarters. They don't chase explosive growth or a quick exit and a payday. They build slowly, they reinvest patiently, and they hand the business down to the next generation. And this exact mindset trickles all the way down into ordinary households. Germans plan for 15, 20, even 30 years ahead as their default setting. And here's the piece of math that should genuinely change everything for you. Two people invest the exact same total amount of money over their lives. The one who started at 25 instead of 35 can end up with nearly double, purely because their money had 10 extra years to compound. The single biggest factor in building wealth isn't your income, and it isn't even your investment returns, it's time. The person who starts small but thinks in decades will almost always crush the person who thinks in months, no matter how much more that second person earns. Time, not salary, is the great equalizer that nobody ever talks about. Habit number 12 is the newest of them all, and it's quietly transforming the entire country right now. For generations, Germans avoided the stock market completely, parking everything in savings accounts that earned almost nothing year after year. But a brand new generation has discovered the ETF SPAR plan, an automatic monthly investment into low-cost index funds. They've taken their old stubborn discipline and bolted it onto a modern engine of real growth. This is the moment the old Germany and the new Germany finally agree. Just imagine that famous German savings instinct, the patience, the boring consistency, now pointed directly at the single most powerful wealth-building tool in human history. 500 euros a month, invested patiently for 30 years, can grow into well over $500,000. Same income, same country, a wildly different ending, decided almost entirely by this one habit. That is the new German formula, and the best part is that you can start it today. No permission, no perfect timing, just the first automatic transfer. So let's go all the way back to where we started, to that person quietly building real wealth on a modest income in a 15-year-old car with no debt and absolutely no need to impress anyone. That isn't luck, and it certainly isn't a six-figure salary. It's 12 simple habits repeated patiently until they become completely invisible. Not a single one of them requires you to earn more money. They only require you to start thinking differently, to feel debt as a weight, to value quiet over flashy, to respect patience over speed. The flashy life is loud and strangely empty, while the quiet life is silent and genuinely full. You don't have to be German to live this way. You just have to decide that real wealth is something you quietly build, not something you loudly display. So start with just one of these habits this week, because the person you become while quietly building your wealth is worth far more than anything you could ever buy to simply look the part. Real wealth was never really about the money. It was always about the freedom that money quietly buys, and that freedom is available to almost anyone willing to live by these rules. If this rewired the way you think about money, watch the video on your screen right now because it goes even deeper into the hidden psychology that keeps most people broke